And if you ignore the need to do your risk management, then it's just going to come back round and bite you in the bum. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Chatting Transformation, the business podcast designed to make your change and transformation journey that little bit easier. My name's Barry, and I've been doing change and transformation for the best part of 20 years, having worked from some of the most junior roles up to leading some significant change and transformation initiatives. And I'm here to pass on my knowledge, my experience and my opinions that hopefully makes your journey that little bit easier. And welcome back to Governance and Controls Week. If you remember back to episode 12, we introduced governance and controls as a theme of this week's episodes. And we talked about the four critical elements of of governance and control that you need. They are planning, RAID, risk assumptions, issues and dependencies, finance, and reporting and decision making. And all four of those are absolutely critical to the success of any change and transformation initiative. We also introduced the idea of what we call value add governance and controls. And that's ensuring that you hit that sweet spot of having sufficient governance and controls in place to add value and provide a positive benefit to the programme, but that you don't then turn it into a bureaucratic nightmare and you have everybody spending their entire time doing change and control. So for each programme, and it will be individual to each programme, there is a real sweet spot for where you want to land your individual change and controls. And a really good test of whether you know what that is to get your programme manager, your PMO staff, etc. To be able to explain to a stakeholder why they're asking for a governance or control to be applied and how that benefits the programme. And if they're able to do that with accuracy, brevity and clarity, then it's going to be successful. If they can't, then you need to do a bit of a review of that change or control or governance process to make sure that you're happy with it. So that's the idea of value add, and I'll talk about how I drive value add as I go through each of these topics over the next couple of episodes. But for today we're talking about RAID management, so risks, assumptions, issues and dependencies. So what are RAIDs? RAIDs are effectively categories of things that will or can affect your plan. We talked about in the last episode about plans and how we build plans and how we understand what the work is, and then we develop a structure of milestones, and that gives us our plan on which we baseline. And then as things happen, we try to stick to that plan, and if we can't, we then have to go through a change control process and all that. That's in the previous episode. Here we're looking at things that are then going to start to impact that plan. And you need to proactively manage your RAID items, or else you're going to be forever firefighting. And once you start firefighting, you're never going to get out of it. And it's a real nightmare to go from being reactive to trying to be proactive in managing your RAID items. So ensure that you set the scene from the start, get it all set up properly, and set the culture to ensure that you're doing that RAID management continuously. I'm going to talk through them. I'm going to review them in a slightly different order to risk assumptions, issues and dependencies. And I'm actually going to start at the end with dependencies. Now, dependencies are effectively the logical relationships between the milestones within our plan, where a milestone is dependent on a precursor milestone, i.e. a milestone that's come before it. So if you think about it, we might have milestone A needs to be completed before milestone B can be started, and B needs to be completed before C can be started. So there's a dependency between B and A, and there's a dependency between C and B. Not always do you have that situation. Some milestones can happen independently or occur independently, or things can happen in parallel, but generally there'll be a number of dependencies. So the first thing I would say is you absolutely need to be identifying your dependencies as you put your plan together. That is by far the best way to do it. It saves you having to try and go back and re-engineer all the dependencies into the plan, which can be difficult. So as you're doing your plan, as you're working out what your milestones are, you should be capturing your dependencies there. And then there's different methodologies and approaches you can use to classify dependencies based on how important they are and the milestones that they relate to, and that really has to be bespoke to your program. But as I say, you normally build them as you plan, and then you understand what those dependencies are. You'll probably, if you're delivering your initiative as a big kind of program or significant project, you'll probably come across two ways in which people talk about them. You'll hear intra-program or intra-project, and that means dependencies that are within your own plan and things that are within your own project and program, and therefore are not going to impact external of your initiative. And then you might hear the other phrase, which is inter-program, inter-project, inter-initiative, and that's where you have dependencies between programs or projects that are being delivered potentially by separate teams or in separate parts of the organisation. And if you think about things like you've got maybe one part of the an organisation is putting in a piece of technology infrastructure, and another one is developing and is going to be implementing some systems or software, and there may be a dependency on some new and updated infrastructure in order to support the new software. So that would be known as an interdependency. And you start to get a real network going of dependencies, but crucially, get them planned, understand where they are within your plan as you go, and you shouldn't have too much difficulty. What I would say with dependency management is I've seen it done really simply and really effectively, and I've seen it be overly bureaucratic and admin based, and it doesn't really take that much. Again, if you're doing it as you're planning, you pop it into your project or program management tool that you're using to plot your milestones. You can just put precursor milestones and all that kind of stuff really easy. If you're forcing people to fill in forms and identifying them and score their dependencies and things like that, you've really got to think about the value that adds. It might add great value to your program because it's a hugely complex program and dependency management is quite complex within that. But generally, do it as you plan. Dependency management doesn't have to be that difficult. The second one is assumptions. And assumptions are also done at the planning stage. Now, you use assumptions where when you're planning and there's part of your plan that there's maybe not quite as much definition or certainty around, i.e. you expect something to happen in this way and therefore you want to plan around it, but you can't put your finger on it definitely happening in that way. You can't guarantee that's going to happen. So where there's a level of uncertainty in the plan at the planning stage, we would mark that as an assumption. So we are assuming that that is going to happen in a certain way. By marking it as an assumption, we basically know there's a level of uncertainty, and then we can monitor it and watch it accordingly. Each assumption then needs effectively its own assumption management plan. And what that plan is designed to do is, as we get more evidence around that assumption and whether it's going to work or not, we have a plan to validate it. So we validate that it's going to happen as we expect, or actually we validate it and go, it's not going to happen as we expect. But there needs to be a proper management plan for each assumption, stating who needs to do what, how, and by when in order for us to validate it. And as we get closer to it, I would expect those assumption plans to be coming into play. And of course, all of those management plans and the associated actions need to be overseen, recorded, reported. That's what your project manager, your program manager, your PMO should be all over. I would also suggest having a backup plan for an assumption. So if you might have something that you're pretty almost absolutely sure is going to happen, but you've just marked it as an assumption anyway, you're virtually certain that it's going to run the way you're expecting. It's still worth having a plan B of what you would do just in case that assumption doesn't come off, because you will be surprised the amount of times I've gone into programs to do health checks or stage gate reviews and I talk about assumptions and I get told, oh, it's going to happen like this, don't worry, that's never going to happen. And then we get to the point and it doesn't happen in the expected way. The assumption had not been properly validated, or some new information had come up and we needed a course correction and there was no pre-planned course correction available. So do have a plan B, do have assumption management in place, and do use it properly. It's a really good tool. I'm going to now talk about risks and issues, and I'll talk about them together because effectively risks and issues are how we manage things that can or do happen during the delivery of a program and that will impact on the delivery. So Some of them might be foreseeable and you might identify them at the beginning, but actually most of them will be emergent throughout the course of delivery. So we've got assumptions, we've got dependencies which we can plot at the start. Risks and issues are the things that will emerge throughout, and then the things we need to manage to protect the plan. So what's the difference? Well, a risk has a level of uncertainty around whether or not it will occur, and if it does occur, what the impact will be. With an issue, we know it's going to happen and we're relatively sure what the impact is going to be because it's virtually certain. So a risk has effectively an element of uncertainty around it. An issue has no uncertainty around it. But either way, we need to ensure that we have robust response plans in place to deal with them. And in order to be able to deal with them and respond to them, we actually need to understand the risks and the issues properly. So for those of you that have dealt with this before, you may be aware that we tend to be quite specific or prescriptive in how we capture a risk or issue. The way I like to do it is I like people to categorise risks and issues as due to, and then identify what the cause of the risk or the issue is. Then go on to there is a risk of, or the following will happen, and a description of the event, the risk or issue event. And then what I want to see on the end is resulting in, and then specify the impact on objectives. So there is a risk of, or there is an issue of, due to either the risk cause or the issue cause, there is a risk of, or there is an issue, the description of the event, resulting in the impact on the objectives. The impact on the objectives is really critical because that's where we'll actually specify generally the milestones within your plan, which are the objectives that are going to be impacted on. So with the resulting in, I like to see it prescribed as these are the milestones that will be impacted upon. When we talk about the cause, it's really important because for a risk in particular, the cause is tied to the likelihood of the thing happening. So if we want to reduce the likelihood or probability of the risk occurring in the first place, then we can put in place controls to target the cause. So controls are the things we target at the cause to reduce probability or likelihood of the event occurring in the first place. That's generally the cheapest way to deal with an emergent risk. It's probably no good for an issue because you know an issue is going to happen, so you're not trying to down the probability. But with something that may or may not happen, you want to target the cause to avoid having to deal with it. If you can't deal with the cause and you don't have any applicable controls, then you can target the event itself. And what we do there is we put in place mitigations. So they're the things we do to reduce the impact of the event. It's generally a bit more expensive to do that because you have to endure the event and you never know with real certainty the extent the event's going to happen to. But if you can't use controls to target the cause in any way, then you do have the ability to mitigate the event. So they're the two types of response actions that you need to be crafting. Controls, targeting the likelihood or probability of the event occurring, and the mitigations to target the impact. Now, I don't want to get too drawn into the way in which we score risks and probability impact diagrams and things like that. We can do a whole episode in the future around how to define a probability and impact diagram, but effectively it's a matrix with probability on one axis and impact on the other, probability going from 0 up to quite a high number, impact going from 0 to very severe. And then basically that helps you plot your risk on it, and that helps you then decide how much of a priority it is to deal with it. And all I will say is a PID needs to be bespoke to your initiative. And again, we'll talk through how you build PIDs in the future and how you utilise them. With risk and issue management, there is a big chunk of forecasting and prediction required. That's hard and it can be time consuming. and it, quite frankly, can also be quite boring and very detailed work, and everyone will try and find an excuse to go and do something else. But it's really important to put the work into this, because by putting the work in to identify potential risks and issues, you are creating the proactive culture within your controls and governance space. It's not about trying to predict the future. It's not a dark art. There's loads of stuff out there that you can use to get a really good approach to identifying risks and issues. It's about using data. It's about using prior experience within the team. It's about stakeholder engagement. It's about having your ear to the ground and knowing what's going on with the organisation, or with something like a regulator or something like that. So there's loads of sources to allow you to do risk and issue management, but it is time consuming and it does take work, but it will reap you massive rewards if you do it. What I would say with risk and issue management is identifying the risk, scoring it, all of that stuff, reporting on it is all great, but the most critical part of risk and issue management is the response plan. Because unless you have a response plan put in place that is going to either remove or reduce or deal with your risk or issue in some way, then it's just risk or issue appreciation. That's how I explain it to stakeholders and to teams that come at me with fantastically drawn out detailed risk plans and PIDs and things like that. And the first thing I want to see is actually the response plan, because the response plan is what's going to make a difference, and that's the value add bit of risk and issue management. And with the response plan, I want to see that yes, it's been properly identified, so you can plan the correct responses, and I'll always check the risk description, but I want to see that there is each action having an owner, a target date, a description of what needs doing, so that there's absolutely no uncertainty around that, a progress status, so not started, in progress, completed, failed. You come up with whatever works for you, and all of that needs to be managed and overseen by your project managers, your PMO, your program manager, recorded and reported through the various governance meetings. By far, risk response plans are the most important thing within risk and issue management. The other thing that I see a lot, and I'm going to get on my hobby horse slightly about it because it drives me up the wall, is people consolidating risks together. So I've already talked about identifying a cause, an event, and an effect. What I find a lot of the time is people because they can't be bothered to write 20 or 30 risks out, they start to consolidate them. So you end up with a risk that says, due to A, or potentially B, or even maybe C, there's a risk of event 1, or maybe event 2, or event 3, that might have the effect of X, or Y, or Z. And you sat there thinking, right, so there's any number of causes, there's any number of events, and there's any number of effects from this one risk. So how do we put in place any kind of response plan? That one should be taken and broken down to at least 3, potentially 6 or 9 risks, depending on how many different things can go wrong. But if you start to consolidate them and get lazy around actually identifying and capturing the risks, then you're just going to create problems down the line when it comes to trying to put in place proper response plans. You'll also turn off everybody involved with risk and issue management, because if they see a massive risk like that pretty much has everything that can go wrong in it, then everyone's just going to take a step back. No one's going to want to get involved in solving it. So create proper risks, single cause, single event, single effect, and then we can have a response plan against it. We can get the response plan done. That risk goes away. We deal with the next risk. That's the way to do risk and issue management. So just to run through, dependencies around the logical relationships between milestones. Then we have the assumptions, which is how you manage uncertainty during the planning phase. And then we have risks and issues, which are how to deal with emergent things that crop up that are going to impact your delivery. All 4, really important, all 4 need to be done properly. And we'll talk more about, we've already linked how they impact the plan. We'll talk more about how they impact finances and budgets in the next episode. But for now, thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please do click the like button. If you can subscribe, that'd be great, because more subscribers means that we get more support for the channel. It means we can make more great videos like this. But for now, thank you all very much and have a good evening.